We were taught almost nothing about nutrition in medical school, or it was really through my own pursuit to try to help myself feel better. They couldn't find anything wrong. It was getting to the point where it's difficult for me to work. Starting to instinctively experiment with my diet to figure out if diet might have some role to play in what I was experiencing. Eventually ended up with a diet that was almost upside down and backwards from what we're told is healthy for us. If you want to burn fat for energy, you don't just need to limit carbohydrate. All of the dots connected for me when I learned about type 2 diabetes is one of the end stage forms of insulin resistance. Anything that spikes your glucose above 110 is a little red flag saying that this is risky. And anything that goes above 140, high glucose levels are toxic to every cell in the body. With type 2 diabetes, which is a disease of high blood sugar, gradually destroys every organ. The eyes, the kidneys, the limbs, the heart, the liver, the brain. And then behind that is the silent roller coaster that you can't see.
You combine like two very fascinating topics for me, which is psychology, psychiatry, the mind, as well as health and nutrition. I'm curious because I heard you say that you had your own health issues. So I find a lot of times, a lot of this is because I've felt like I've needed these aspects. And so it like makes me learn so much more about them. So I feel like a lot of times this is how someone becomes really, really good at an area of life, is because they've needed it. So what was that for you?
Yeah, it really was. Like so many of us who we stumble into these alternative ways of thinking about nutrition because we weren't taught to think about nutrition and mental health in this way. We were taught almost nothing about nutrition in medical school or residency. It was really through my own selfish pursuit to try to help myself feel better that I became interested in nutrition and mental health. So those issues it was really in my early 40s. So I'm 60 now. In my early 40s, I started having some health issues that were somewhat mysterious and difficult to define, like so many of my patients were dealing with. So these were things like chronic pain and IBS symptoms and fibromyalgia and migraine headaches, fatigue. All of these things were becoming worse as I entered my early 40s. I'd never had these issues before. And I was exercising really rigorously at that point in my life, running, going to the gym, lifting weights. I was following a low-calorie, low-fat, high-fiber diet. I think like many women, at least at that time, were doing, salads and skinless chicken breast and Diet Coke and soy milk and those sorts of things.
Oh, yeah.
Was what my diet looked like.
I remember the soy days.
Non-fat yogurt, right? Nobody drinks that anymore.
No. I think it was the estrogen that really took it down.
Yeah, so I was following this diet, and primarily, I think a lot of women will identify with this, and some men too, to try to control my weight. I'd always had a weight problem my whole life, even when I was a little girl. And this worked to varying degrees, exercising and calorie counting and so forth worked to some extent. Mm-hmm. But then my health started to deteriorate, and I was working at Harvard at the time as a psychiatrist. And so I went to see, I had the privilege of being able to consult with very intelligent specialists of various kinds who could do all kinds of sophisticated testing, and they couldn't find anything wrong. And so I was really left to my own devices to try to figure out how was I going to help myself feel better, because it was getting to the point where it's difficult for me to work. And I love my work and also just wanted to be healthy and feel good. Yeah. So that's what happened. And it was really trying to understand, starting to instinctively experiment with my diet to figure out if diet might have some role to play in what I was experiencing, and trial and error, and eventually ended up with a diet that was almost upside down and backwards from what we're told is healthy for us. And that was what inspired me to start really studying nutrition for the first time.
The days are getting longer and spring is right around the corner. That means more outdoor activities, fresh energy, and a great time to refresh your wellness routine with a great tasting daily health drink. How does AG1 make it easy to support your body with one simple habit? Unlike other supplements that come and go, AG1 is a habit that actually sticks because you can feel the difference. I've noticed so many benefits since drinking AG1 over the past few years. AG1 can help support your digestion, your energy levels, your skin health from within, cravings, and so many more things. Have you noticed any of these? When it comes to my health, I want something I can trust, and that's why I choose AG1. With science-backed ingredients and real benefits I can feel, AG1 makes it easy to support overall wellness every day. And that's why I've been partnering with AG1 for so long. And AG1 is offering new subscribers a free $76 gift when you sign up. You'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of D3K2, and 5 free travel packs with your first box. So make sure you check out drinkag1.com/prettyintense and get this offer. That's drinkag1.com/prettyintense to start your new year on a healthier note. Such a familiar story. I feel like a similar one even. I am in my early 40s, and in my sort of mid 30s, I started to have issues and again, like have to go on your own adventure to figure it out. And it's arduous, it's time consuming, it's frustrating, and there aren't always a lot of answers or easy answers. So I relate to you. I'm proud of you because it's led to a fantastic book and it's led to a lot of information. Before we get into more of the specifics about that and about food and insulin and diet and also psychology and how that plays into it, I'm curious if you can reflect on even some other aspects of that constellation of practices that you had that led you to where you were, that you would say now you could look back and say maybe this wasn't the best thing, whether it be low carb, low cal, overworking out, what things could you look at from that before we get into the specifics about what you really have dove in on that you would have changed if you could go back?
Oh, if I could go back and talk to my, my third grade self, I would.
Third grade. Oh, yeah, true.
I would teach her about nutrition and how the body works, how hormones work, how weight management works, which foods are the healthiest for us, why yo-yo dieting is so dangerous for our metabolic health over time. I would teach her all of those things. But really it was what I discovered over time was that calorie counting did help to a certain extent. It's not that it doesn't matter at all. It does help. The older I got, I sort of went through these different phases where calorie counting and sort of normal amount of exercise was working for me when I was able to stick to it until my maybe late 20s. Then I discovered the South Beach diet that worked a little better for me. So a certain degree of carbohydrate manipulation, meaning, low glycemic index carbohydrates, more slowly digested carbohydrates, that seemed to do a better job than straightforward calorie counting had done before. And then that didn't work as well for me anymore. As I approached my 40s, I tried the Atkins diet, which the way it was described in popular books at the time did not work well for me. But it had led to my mother losing 90 pounds. My mother lost 90 pounds on the Atkins diet, and that inspired me to try it. That was my first adventure into carbohydrate restriction. It really was through my own reading that and participating in nutrition conferences that I stumbled into the ketogenic diet. So this was quite a long time ago before most people had ever heard of it. The principles of the ketogenic diet made so much sense to me just intuitively, is that if you want to burn fat for energy, you don't just need to limit carbohydrate, but you need to be careful about other aspects of your diet as well. And this includes protein and even fat to a certain extent. And the kinds of foods you eat are also very important. So it just everything, all of the dots connected for me when I learned about how insulin and glucose levels and food choices come together to create a healthy metabolism.
All right, well, let's talk about insulin. I was just watching, I was looking at social media a little bit ago, and there was something that popped up, and it was a woman saying basically, we can probably boil down almost every disease to insulin resistance. So I think that, and myself included, through all of my journeys, as I said, improving my health, I wore a CGM for 6 months, and my dad's worn it, and he thinks it's the best thing that there's ever been. To change my meat and potatoes dad, who wouldn't eat a vegetable to save his life, which I actually don't think is that big of a deal anymore. It's like to get him to change his diet was remarkable. So I think the CGM is a really great thing, but this all just leads to people learning about their insulin and learning about what happens when they eat a food at all, but like also what kinds of food. So talk about how does someone become insulin resistant? over time, and how long does that actually take?
So insulin resistance is a very natural and predictable process. It's perfectly normal physical reaction to too much insulin in the body. So any hormone, if you overexpose yourself to any hormone, whether it's insulin or thyroid hormone or testosterone or estrogen, any hormone you overexpose yourself to, the cells of your body will naturally tune down their response to that hormone to protect themselves from becoming overstimulated by it. So to try to keep the equilibrium, sort of restore equilibrium. And insulin is no different. So if you overexpose your cells to insulin, most of them will become insulin resistant over time. And depending on this gets worse and worse over the years, the longer you eat the wrong way. And so it can occur very quickly, but for most of us, it's gradually building up over decades. In fact, we even now, it's sad to say, we have children with insulin resistance to the point that many of them even now have type 2 diabetes, which was really rare, just a few decades ago. So type 2 diabetes is one of the end stage forms of insulin resistance when you've had high insulin levels for so long that your insulin no longer works well to keep your blood sugar in control. But that is a process that's taking place over many, many years because the insulin is trying. It's rising and rising. The more carbohydrate you have in your diet, especially the refined carbohydrates, the naked carbohydrates, things like sugars and flours and cereals and juices, the more of those you consume, then the more insulin you're going to need to produce to try to keep your blood sugar in control until it just can't do it anymore. So your glucose might look perfectly normal first thing in the morning when you're fasting, after you haven't eaten anything overnight, and that's when most doctors check your glucose is fasting in the morning when it's at its lowest point. Your glucose might look perfectly normal, but it's not going to look normal after meals. And your insulin levels are going to be very high to try to keep that glucose under control. And that's one of the very important numbers that's missing when you go to your doctor to get your annual checkup. They may be looking for fasting glucose when it's at its lowest point, so they're not going to see any problems, but they're not looking at the fasting insulin. How much insulin are you needing to produce to keep your glucose levels in that fasting healthy range?
I mean, I definitely went down the road of, not eating anything that would have too big of a spike of insulin. So very, very low reaction foods to none, which was a great education. I mean, it's like a CGM is fantastic education. Have you wore one before?
Oh, I've worn them multiple times. And I ask all of my patients who are willing to do it and who can afford one to wear one as well. And it is like having a crystal ball into your metabolism. It's like having, you can look directly at how you personally respond, not just to your food choices, but also to exercise and sleep and stress and medications, caffeine. Lots of different things can affect your glucose levels. And most of my patients find it really fun to look at their glucose in real time. But I have yet to have a patient who has worn a continuous glucose monitor and not changed their diet.
I want to talk a little bit about the insulin spike because I've done that. And then you've probably heard of Paul Saladino. Have you heard of Paul Saladino? I remember talking to him because he'll also, eat honey and fruits and different things and has what he calls the carnivore diet. And so he's like, no, you should have blood sugar spikes are okay. So look, it kind of like, he's a very smart guy. So I thought about that and I'm like, okay, so you're an expert in this. Is that a good thing to have in general? Some levels of spikes? Is it just like a telltale sign of if it stays up too long, you've abused your insulin? You've abused that insulin response. Like, is it a bad thing to eat foods that give rise to insulin?
So there are two different parts of that question. One is the glucose spike and one is the insulin spike.
Oh, okay.
And this is where a lot of people will get confused because they are different. So a CGM looks at your glucose level, but it can't tell you what your insulin level is. So every time you have something with carbohydrate in it, your glucose will go up, and that's normal. And for it to go up to a certain extent is perfectly normal, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's how fast did it rise and how high did it go? And so, for example, in the book, there's a chapter where I advise people about what the ideal target ranges are for glucose and what you should not exceed. And so they're really on a glucose monitor, you can see the glucose, and if it's going up. Ideally, what you want is for your fasting and your after meal insulin to never be above 110 milligrams per deciliter.
Yeah.
It's okay for it to go up, 10 or 20 points after a meal, but your baseline should really be down, 70, 80, maybe 90 tops. You really don't want your resting insulin level to be above 85, ideally, maybe 90 tops. And then your after meal insulin, you really, for optimal health, you want it to stay at 110 or below. And so anything that spikes your glucose above 110 is a little red flag saying this is risky. And anything that goes above 140 is definitely into the danger zone. The more often you spike your glucose over 140, the more likely you are to be damaging cells throughout your entire brain and body, because all cells are vulnerable. High glucose levels are toxic to every cell in the body. And that's why people with type 2 diabetes, which is a disease of high blood sugar, is a disease that gradually destroys every organ in the body. The eyes, the kidneys, the limbs, the heart, the liver, and so the brain. And so a certain degree of glucose fluctuation is normal and nothing to worry about, but it is a matter of degree. And then behind that is the silent roller coaster that you can't see, which is the insulin roller coaster. So if your glucose is going up and down, but it's staying in a relatively healthy range, that's very reassuring. But how much insulin is it taking to keep that glucose in that healthy range? And that's the part that people often are not aware of. So to give a really concrete example, my mom is 91 years old, and last year she decided that she wanted to start a ketogenic diet for a variety of mental and physical health reasons.
Good for her.
And amazing. My mother is
Good for her.
amazing. She was having a lot of dizziness and headaches and sleep problems and depression, pain, and balance issues. So just sort of in a nutshell. And so, and she had some weight to lose. And so she started a ketogenic diet, and she was wearing a glucose monitor. And so as we adjusted the diet together, we could see that her glucose was coming into the nice, healthy, normal range. It was beautiful. After just a couple of weeks, it looked absolutely wonderful.
Fantastic. That's fast.
It really doesn't take that long. You can normalize and stabilize your glucose levels within a matter of days if you have the right information. Mm-hmm. And so that's not the hard part. The hard part is understanding what's going on behind it, which is the insulin piece. So my mom was feeling so much better in so many ways, but she'd started to lose some weight, but then she got stuck at a plateau, and she still had quite a bit more weight she wanted to lose. So she was frustrated. Why am I following this low carbohydrate diet? My glucose levels are normal. Why am I not losing weight? And so I said, well, Mom, would you be willing to measure your ketones? Which is something that I was worried she might not be willing to do, because you do have to prick your finger or your toe every day. Yeah. And, it's uncomfortable, too. Right?
The strips probably don't really work as well, right? The ones that you pee on, you can pee on little strips and they kind of give you an indication. They're just not that accurate.
They're measuring something different, which is how many ketones you're losing in your urine. Different. But they're useful. So for a long time, there were no blood strips available. And so urine strips were the best that anybody had. And they do give you kind of a crude indication, kind of a yes-no indication of whether or not you've been in ketosis since you last emptied your bladder. And that's very useful. So for people who won't or can't prick their finger, or they can't afford a blood ketone meter, which does cost more than the urine measurements, absolutely, whatever way you can measure is great. But the blood is more accurate. You have to keep
buying strips. However often you want to test yourself, you just got to have a lot of strips available.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so, she agreed quite readily. And so we could see that, even though her glucose was normal, her ketones were low. And we don't have a way to measure insulin at home, but ketones are really the mirror image of your insulin level. So the higher your ketones, the lower your insulin, and the lower your ketones, the higher your insulin. So if your ketones are very low, your insulin levels are probably running a little too high. And if your insulin levels are running too high, you can't burn fat for energy. So when insulin is high, it turns off fat burning, turns it off.
Mm-hmm.
When insulin is low, it switches fat burning on. And it's really as simple as that. And if somebody had told me this back when I was in the third grade, I would have been, I would have been delighted to understand this. So she wasn't losing weight, which meant that her insulin levels were too high. The ketones confirmed that. And so we made some adjustments to her diet to bring those insulin levels down. So now her glucose was beautiful, but her insulin needed to still come down some more. So the way we did that was we cut back on some of those vegetables that she was eating. Even though she was only eating 20 carbohydrates per day, it was still too much for her. And she was following net carbs. On packaging, you'll see.
Oh yeah, they lie all the time on back of packages. I mean, you got to be able to do math if you really want to know what you're eating calorie-wise and carbohydrate-wise.
That's right. And my mom was enjoying a couple of slices per day it was like a keto-friendly pita bread and something like that. And so it had 3 net carbs per slice. And she said, well, how many of these can I have per day? And I said, well, let's find out. She had a piece. We saw on the glucose monitor, her blood sugar went up to 160 after one piece. And she picked up the bread and she opened up the trash can and she said, they're lying to me. And she threw it away.
Right.
And so the glucose is one level, the insulin is another. So for people who are trying to burn fat or trying to achieve certain mental or physical health benefits by getting into ketosis and lowering those insulin levels, the ketone meter is really the best way to figure that out. So if your ketones are high, your insulin is low and vice versa. So that's an indirect way of measuring your insulin levels.
Ah, okay. All right. Gosh, I had no idea that the ketones and insulin were related because you're right. With the CGM, you're just testing your blood sugar. You're just testing that glucose level, correct?
Yes, and that's a fantastic goal. I mean, just lowering and stabilizing glucose is a wonderful health achievement. But if you get stuck and you're not achieving all of your goals, then you want to look at that next level of intervention, which is the insulin level.
So let's talk about an aspect that I was really curious about throughout my journey of doing things that I feel like had quite an impact. Generally, just stressing the body and perhaps cortisol. I don't think they're always the same, but I think cortisol and stresses to the body, like fasting, hot sauna, cold plunge, hard workouts, all these different things like feel to me like, for at least me, I feel like I like try and limit the amount of stress to my body and my inflammation stays down and my body weight, my body composition stays to a really healthy point. So I'm curious what your thoughts are about cortisol's sort of involvement and things that stress the body.
You're absolutely right. So cortisol and adrenaline, which are the 2 major stress hormones in the body, these are also hormones. So insulin is one hormone, but cortisol and adrenaline are 2 additional hormones that we also have to pay attention to. And this is exactly why simply counting carbohydrates is often not enough to get people where they're trying to go. Just as you said, stress, intense exercise, heat exposure, being ill, having an injury or an infection, a virus or a bacterial infection or recovering from an injury or from a surgery.
Emotional stress, mental stress. Like,
Yes.
I mean, they talk about like a chess player or somebody doing something intense with their mind and the amount of calories that actually burns in the body. I don't remember what the exact percentage is, but the amount of mental activity you have accounts for like a very large percentage of the amount of calories you burn. So we sort of forget about that aspect playing a role in our stress.
That's exactly right. And so stress is very, very important, both emotional, psychological stress, intellectual stress, work stress, and physical stress. All of these send signals to the body that you need more energy. And so what the body will do is it's very clever. It thinks that you need more energy to deal with this stress. And so it tells the liver, adrenaline and cortisol tell the liver to make new glucose molecules and release them into the bloodstream. So even if you're not eating any carbohydrate at all, you can see your glucose rise on a continuous glucose monitor because your body is making that glucose from scratch. And that can keep your glucose levels too high for too long or in an unhealthy state, regardless of what kind of diet you're following. And so that's another aspect of metabolic health, and that is really important to pay attention to. And that's why it's not all about diet.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I have patients who are not in ketosis, even though they're following the plan that I've recommended for them to the letter, we look at other things. We look at their stress level, their exercise. A certain amount of exercise is really important and critical for metabolic health, but there is such a thing as overdoing it. And I look at their medications. Many medications can raise glucose levels, and some of them can even affect the stress hormone levels. So the body is very intelligent, and it's trying to figure out what you need. It's trying to meet your needs. And if you understand how these different players, the role that these different hormones play, you can have so much more control over how you feel, how you look, how you perform, and most importantly, at least from my standpoint as a psychiatrist, over your emotional and cognitive health.
Because a lot of those are called hormetic stresses as well, right? It's good to have some of them. So maybe before we move on, we just touch on that and when to know to put those stresses on your body, and like what are hormetic stresses and how often should you do them? When do you know it's safe to do them?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right again. So the hormesis, or these hormetic stressors, these are stresses that are good for your body, meaning that the benefit far outweighs the risk. And exercise is a perfect example of that. Because if you never exercise, you will not have good metabolic health. And exercise is a stress on the body, and it does involve, certain cells will break down and rebuild themselves. For example, muscle cells. It is a stress on the body. It does raise stress hormone levels, but ultimately, so in the short term, there's some stress, some pain, and some inflammation and some remodeling of the body, and that does put a stress on the body. That's the price you pay. But then benefit that you receive from that is a stronger musculature, better body composition, better energy, more mitochondria being produced in the muscles. The mitochondria will multiply to meet those higher energy demands that you place on your muscles, better circulation, better self-esteem. Overall, generally speaking, lower glucose and insulin levels. So even though while you're exercising, your body may produce some glucose to fuel those muscles, overall, your glucose levels in the long run will run lower because working muscles soak up glucose like a sponge. So if you've got, you'll need a lot less insulin to deal with carbohydrate if you are exercising regularly. And this is one of the reasons why even people who don't eat a very healthy diet can, to a certain extent, keep themselves relatively metabolically healthy with exercise. Ultimately, the diet does need to be addressed as well, but exercise goes a long way towards helping people protect their metabolic health.
Mm-hmm. Is it fair to say that the more muscle you have, the more calories you can eat? Because muscle is an extremely it's a very expensive material for the body to hold on to from a metabolic standpoint. It requires a lot of calories to be maintained, and that we tend to get rid of it first before anything else because it's so expensive. So the more muscle you have, the more food you can eat. Is that true?
It's absolutely true. Muscle is very metabolically demanding. And one of the things that people who are following low carbohydrate and ketogenic diets like a lot about exercise is that it does allow them to get away with a little bit more carbohydrate while still being able to stay in ketosis. Really, when you combine diet and exercise, which is what, we've heard for decades, but most of us don't pay enough attention to.
It's just too easy. We want it to be more complicated. Where's the pill?
Yeah, exactly. And the other thing is that what kind of diet and what kind of exercise, right? And why don't you want to exercise? Why don't you feel like exercising? And why do you feel like eating all the time? And if you have the right information about why you're not feeling well, why you don't feel like you want to exercise, why you feel like you want to eat all the time. Simple changes to the diet can really unlock a lot of your potential and allow you to then want to exercise in a way that you might never have felt like you wanted to before. And again, coming back to my 91-year-old mother, she's not an exercise person, and we did not grow up with good exercise habits. This is something that I have had to really work at as an adult, because I didn't learn them as a child. And when you learn them as a child, it's so much better. But my mom has not really ever been an exerciser. And after being on the ketogenic diet for about, I think it was maybe about 4 months, actually in ketosis, she just spontaneously, without anybody ever even suggesting it to her, started exercising. She started getting up during commercials and doing laps around the kitchen table. And she had my sister order her a step counter, and she's up to 7,000 steps per day. And she's very proud of that.
It's actually hard. I by no means get that a day. If I have to like try and shoot for 10,000, that's like 1 or 2 purposeful walks a day. So that is incredible. Normally, when, folks get older, it's hard to just get off the couch, let alone go on a marching mission around the entire living room. So your mom is a force. I love this.
It is that energy came, her energy got locked. She never felt like doing that before. So it came from within and was spontaneous, and that's available to everybody.
Gosh, it's like, one of the things that I felt like for me was that I just kind of had a mantra to myself where it was like, if I give my body the environment to heal, it knows what to do. It knows what to do. And it's almost like I had to underuse my abilities to create a safe space. It was almost like my body went, I don't trust you yet. Like, we have to really tone it down in so many different ways, and you really have to chill out, because I used to be one of those overworkers for sure. But obviously diet plays a huge role as well. So to cap off my own journey, it was like I went from overworking out, under eating, to basically going to just lifting and eating, focusing so much on protein. I unfortunately went down a little bit of journey here and there over the years with wondering how important the macronutrient of protein was, to wonder, I bought into some of those propaganda movies, those, or there was like Forks Over Knives, and there was, I'm trying to think, there was a few of them that were pretty impactful.
Yes.
And so I bought into it, and I like love to find the new cool vegan restaurant, because I was much more healthy if I ate that way. I joked to my dad, I'm like, meat and potatoes, Dad. I'm like, and screw the vegetables. I'm like, you've been right all along, Dad. You've been right. Because that's a lot of what my diet is now, which leads me to the macronutrient question. Obviously, your mom has all of this new energy. The body is now healed. It sounds like it's in some level of homeostasis. It's like, look, we have energy now. Let's go, get up and move your 7,000 steps. But how important, and what do you think is the right parameter for those macronutrients? Is the 40-30-30 still a good guideline? Or I know it's very hard with this stuff because it can be a little bit individualized, of course, but how important are macronutrients, and what do each of those do? Because obviously your mom's generating energy not from eating, not from carb loading.
One of my favorite things to talk about, and I love the way you set up the question, because it comes from such an informed place, a well-informed place in your own journey, where just like so many of us, we've had to experiment with different things, and we've followed different pieces of advice and wasted a lot of time trying to figure out what's true about what the human body actually needs. So there are 3 macronutrients: protein, fat, and carbohydrate. Of these 3, protein is the most important. Protein is made of amino acids. There are essential amino acids that we cannot make ourselves. So we must consume the full complement of amino acids, which means getting high quality protein in our diets. And how much protein, this is a matter of great debate. There are some formulas in the book that help people personalize their protein targets. But for most people, it's going to fall somewhere between 90 and 150 grams per day, depending on who you are and what your goals are. And you can tweak that so to your own outcomes. So you do need to eat high quality protein, and the highest quality protein, meaning that the kinds of protein sources that provide you with all of the amino acids that you need, are the animal source foods. And it's just the truth about our biology. And so There's more about that in the book, but there really is there's no way around that.
Yeah.
And
As a
so
side note, I
unfortunately,
totally got down the road with the plants, and also having the negative side effect of a lot of heavy metals in plant proteins too. With plant proteins, that's a danger too, is just being exposed to other issues outside of just protein deficiency. Is, heavy metals are latent in plant proteins, especially the powder form and whatnot, right?
yeah, there are many risks to uh, trying to obtain all of your protein from plants, um, because it's not just about protein. As you said, it's about all of the other components of those foods, many of which are not necessarily very good for us. And so the benefits of the amino acids that you may find in certain plant foods like legumes come with quite a bit of
Mm,
baggage. And
mm,
so, there's a chapter in the book about grains, beans, nuts, and seeds that explains exactly what what the real risks and benefits of eating a plant-based diet are. I am nutritionally pro-choice. So if someone comes to me and says, I really prefer a plant-based diet, I will still work really hard with them to optimize that diet to be as brain healthy as we can possibly make it while still
yeah.
honoring their dietary preferences, but it is not biologically ideal.
Okay.
So there's only so much you can do to improve the quality of that diet. There are important things, but there will be limits to what you can achieve following that dietary plan. So protein is important. So prioritizing protein. The next most important macronutrient is fat. And people think about fat as just a source of energy or something that makes you fat. But fat also contains really important nutrients, especially the fat-soluble nutrients, which are A, D, E, and K. And then there are certain essential fatty acids that we cannot make ourselves. There are two omega-3 fatty acids, DHA and EPA, and an omega-6 fatty acid called arachidonic acid. These are DHA and arachidonic acid are critical for brain health. And so, and these do not exist in plant foods. So fat is very important for digestion, for absorption of nutrients, for provision of nutrients, and as a source of energy. Carbohydrates are the only of the three macronutrients, the only macronutrient that is entirely optional. Because we do need glucose. Glucose is the simple sugar that travels in the bloodstream, blood sugar. And we do need some glucose in our bloodstream at all times, of course. And the brain also does need some glucose at all times to function at its best. But that glucose does not need to come from the diet because we can make all the glucose we need from scratch inside of our own bodies. And
How?
that's something most people do not
Huh.
know.
I was under the impression that there was one of them, protein can convert to a glucose. I thought maybe, but you just said it can be made in the body. So is that how it's being made, or how does the body make the glucose needed? Because I know that
Exactly.
you can live off of meat alone, but you sure can't live off broccoli alone. I have my friend here. I live in Arizona, the Petersons. You probably, Jordan Peterson and his daughter,
Sure.
Michaela Peterson, started I don't know if you've spoken to her yet, but she would be fascinated with all this too. But, she started the Lions diet, and she literally lives off of just steak all day, every day.
Yes, I've met Michaela at conferences, and I'm very familiar with her work,
Yeah.
um, and with her diet, of course, and her story. And it's one of many really important stories of remarkable recovery and healing that people have experienced on carnivore diets. That's one of the diet plans in the book that people can explore is the carnivore diet. So there's a
Mhm.
ketogenic diet, a carnivore diet, and also a modified paleo diet for people who don't want to do low carb or keto. So, so options, so you're exactly right again, Danica. So, the way that the body makes glucose is out of protein and fat. And so as long as you've got enough protein and fat to work with, which you will if you're following good nutrition principles, then you will be able to make all the glucose you need 24/7 without any hills or peaks or valleys or drama, reliably and smoothly and consistently from protein and fat. And in fact, one of the things I like to argue is just to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit, is that you could get your glucose from outside your body or inside your body. It's really your choice if you want to consume dietary carbohydrate. But when you get, I would argue that it's actually safer to make it yourself, because when you make it yourself, it's a demand-driven system. Your body knows how much you need, and it will only make the amount you need and no more.
Oh, that's so smart. The body is so smart. It's so ridiculously smart.
Yeah, whereas if you eat carbohydrate, you really don't know exactly how much you need. And if you eat more than you need, which is what most people are doing now by, most people are eating 2, 3, 4 times as much carbohydrate as they actually need. If you eat more than you can store or burn off immediately through exercise, and we have very small storage tanks for carbohydrate in our bodies. We have large, essentially unlimited storage tanks for fat in our bodies, for better or for worse. But carbohydrate, we just have very small storage tanks. And so if you eat more at one sitting, more carbohydrate than you can store or burn right away, every single extra gram of carbohydrate that you eat that you didn't need, the body turns immediately into saturated fat and sends it out into and stores it.
It turns it into
Saturated fat. And so on purpose. And so I like to say that a low fat, high carbohydrate diet is actually a high fat diet.
Mm.
All that carbohydrate, extra carbohydrate, turns into fat whether you want it to or not.
This is just a curious question. Are there different points in our life from youth on that we multiply our fat cells? I feel like that's something I had heard before, and that fat cells you don't get rid of fat cells, you just grow and shrink them. But there are incremental points in your life throughout sort of youth, maybe till your 20s or something, where you multiply them at some points. It's true. Is that true? Or do you sort of, if someone is overweight as a child, is this a deficit for them later in life because of that?
Well, that's outside of my area of expertise. I will acknowledge I don't know as much about that as I wish I did. I am aware of this concept of the number of fat cells versus the size of the fat cells. And I know that at a certain point in life, you have all the fat cells you're going to have, and you're just going to be making them bigger or smaller. That, I think, is an area, the area of expertise. The person who is best to ask that question of is Dr. Van Bickman. So Dr. Van Bickman is one of the world's leading experts in insulin resistance.
Yeah, he's wonderful.
And
I have talked to him.
written a wonderful book called Why We Get Sick, which is all about insulin resistance. And so he understands at a much deeper level than I do the dynamics of fat cells, I have to say.
Oh, well, I very respect you for passing the baton over to someone that you feel would do a better job. So if I want to follow up with that question, for sure, I'll go to him upon your direction. So thank you for that. So I want to talk about psychology because I'm just so fascinated. And obviously it's so sad to understand that statistically there's 1 billion people on this planet with mental health issues. Everything is connected: food, body, mind, everything. How is that so? How can that much of the planet be suffering with mental health issues?
It really is tragic. And we've come to expect poor mental health as normal, and good mental health is unusual and unexpected. It's upside down from the way it should be. The global rise in mental health concerns of all kinds has been steep in the past few decades, and it parallels the rise in poor metabolic health and in poor dietary quality. These are kind of 3 pandemics that are going hand in hand. The deterioration in the quality of our diet, really since the 1950s, and especially since the 1970s, and poor metabolic health, high glucose levels, high insulin levels, obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, all these metabolic health problems. And along with both of these is the third part of the pandemic, which is poor mental health. Because all cells, the metabolism of every cell matters. So metabolism is just how well cells are working. How well are they able to? Are they getting the nutrients they need? Are they Are their operating systems humming along beautifully? Are they able to get rid of waste products? Are they able to build the components that they need? Are they able to clean up after themselves? Are they able to generate energy? are they able to carry out their daily business and in a healthy way? That's metabolism. And so if your cells are not metabolically healthy, then none of your organs will function properly, including the brain.
Mm. Well, what came to mind as you were saying that and you put sort of the timestamp date on it made me think about your mom and her keto bread, like how highly processed that must also be, and how you think about like the Campbell's soup food era, where it was like come back from war, everything gets mass produced, it's preservatives, it's in cans, it lasts forever, and how we've gone away from farms, growing your own food, making your own food, and it's really probably that follows that timeline. Do you think that that is what has played a huge role in this metabolic issue, is just food that is essentially not alive?
Absolutely. That is exactly right. Uh, what's really happened to our diet is that we used to eat foods from farms and fisheries and fields, and now we eat foods from factories. So 60% of what Americans eat now is no longer food. And it comes originally, it's made out of food. It starts as a food, but it's made unrecognizable. It's pulled apart, deconstructed by factory processing, and it no longer behaves like food in the body. So even if it's
Right.
plant-based, or even if it's organic, or even if it's, sourced from, whole foods, that doesn't mean it's good for you.
Mm. Um, I'm curious about anxiety. I feel like anxiety is that considered it's considered one of the mental health issues, right? Anxiety, it's probably the biggest. And
Absolutely. It's one of the most common.
and like for instance, my sister who has four girls and her oldest is 11, and all of a sudden somehow in the last like 6 months or so, she's just ridden with anxiety. She's afraid
Mhm.
she's going to be murdered in the middle of the night. She's afraid for any piece of clothing she puts on. Maybe she needs to change it. She's all of a sudden anxiety is just there. And I'm so curious because obviously this is something that adults suffer with too, but how does this kick in for someone? My sister, like they eat or healthy, organic, real foods. They spend a lot of their money on making sure that's high quality. So I'm just so curious where this comes from. It's such an area of curiosity for me.
I can see why. I mean, this is somebody you care about, and she's changing before your very eyes. And this is age 11 is very interesting. You say that she's 11
Hmm.
because she's entering puberty.
Hmm.
And puberty is metabolically a very interesting time, because it's one of only two times in life when the body becomes naturally insulin resistant on purpose. And so it's puberty and pregnancy. So in puberty, insulin levels rise and the body becomes a little bit more insulin resistant. And the reason for that, one of the reasons for that, is insulin isn't just a blood sugar regulator, it's also a master growth hormone. So puberty is a time of a growth spurt, and lots of different things are changing. Cells are multiplying, people are getting taller, they're sexually differentiating. Lots of and the hormones are really busy, obviously, at this time in life, including insulin. I obviously don't know her, and I don't know anything about her metabolic health or her health, or enough about her diet to say that I'm sure what's going on. But the first place I would look, and I'm not a child or adolescent psychiatrist, I'm just somebody who understands nutrition and metabolism very well. The first thing I would do would be look at her diet and see if there's some excess carbohydrate that could be removed, especially the first place always to look is the refined carbohydrate: sugars, flours, cereals, fruit juices. And most teens are consuming those foods on somewhat regular basis. And that is now you're going to have the natural insulin resistance of puberty, plus the insulin resistance that can come from refined carbohydrate intake. And the two of those things together can put a person into a difficult situation. The relationship between insulin resistance and mental health, what we see in children is that children with anxiety disorders, those are the ones who are more likely to have insulin resistance.
Huh.
And so that would be the very first place that I would look.
what's interesting is that she used to be like this super healthy eater. She loved her avocado toast, and her diet did change. She like wants more sweets, I think now. And that's super fascinating.
It's a very, very simple, not easy. It's a very simple intervention. And usually, people with anxiety, as you were pointing out before, it's really common. And it's also kind of low-hanging fruit when it comes to metabolic psychiatry, which is the type of psychiatry that I practice. And if with sometimes very simple changes to the diet, you can see dramatic reductions in anxiety, sometimes even with just in a few days.
Well, I'm flying to Indiana to go do a commercial shoot, and I'm surprising the girls, and I'm gonna be there to make them breakfast. So I was gonna make them eggs, bacon, and pancakes, and maybe I'll scrap the pancakes. So another curiosity, I was looking at reading some of your book, and you mentioned the DSM and how in psychiatry, essentially the patient needs to fall into some aspect of what's in the DSM, which I had to look up, Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. They have to fall into that to be able to be diagnosed, to receive medication. I'm just curious what your thoughts are about the DSM in general and its effectiveness and use.
I don't have a lot good to say about the DSM, and I do point this out in the book. It's not a useless book, but it's not very useful. So what it really is, and I explain this in the book too, it's a list of diagnoses. It's a very large book. It's more than 1,000 pages long. It's a list of diagnoses and then the symptoms underneath each one. And then, sometimes a few pages describing the diagnosis. As a psychiatrist, especially if I'm using insurance let's say you come to me and you have depression or anxiety and you come to me for help. The way I was trained to work is I was trained to take a really careful history of your symptoms. When did they begin? Can you tell me more about them? And as I'm talking to you, I'm in my mind, I've got this list of symptoms, this checklist of symptoms, say if you have anxiety, and I'm mentally checking off how many symptoms do you have of anxiety that are listed in the DSM, because if you have a certain number of them, then you officially qualify for a diagnosis of, say, generalized anxiety disorder or obsessive compulsive disorder or a panic disorder, right? So, and the reason I'm doing that is because, especially if you want to use insurance to pay for your visit, the insurance companies do require there are billable diagnoses and non-billable diagnoses. And if you meet those criteria, then I can say you have this diagnosis and I write the code down, and then the insurance company will reimburse for your visit. And so, but what's missing in the DSM are two really important things. One is, why do you have anxiety? What's causing it? And the other is, what am I supposed to do about it? So I have this more than 1,000-page book that is my reference book to use in my practice, and it doesn't tell me how to help you. It doesn't tell me which medicine I should prescribe, why you have this problem. I'm really left to a trial and error tactics of figuring out, okay, well, what kinds of therapy might work best for her? Or she already tried those things before. What kinds of medicines has she already taken? If she's never taken any, I have a few that I could sort of randomly pick off the shelf that sometimes work better for anxiety than others. And we go through this algorithm of, let's start with this one, and if that doesn't work, let's change to this one, and if that doesn't work, let's change to this one, because there are no tests I can give you. No tests I can give you to figure out why you have anxiety, or even what to do about it. And we're practicing in the dark in psychiatry, even in 2025. And that's why metabolic psychiatry, this brand new field, it's less than 10 years old. That's why the metabolic psychiatry is so exciting. It's such an exciting time to be a psychiatrist, but also it's a really empowering time to be a person with a mental health issue, because finally we have ways of thinking about, testing for, and addressing metabolic root causes of mental health conditions of all kinds.
Mm-hmm. Do you also administer any kinds of other modalities or techniques outside of ways to cure things through the food and nutrition? As a psychiatrist, do you practice those? Do you do EMDR? Do you do any of the other kinds of modalities?
So as a psychiatrist, I was trained to use medications and psychotherapy.
As a psychiatrist versus like psychologist, the difference is a psychiatrist can write a prescription, right?
Right. So psychiatrists,
One of them.
exactly. There are many differences, but a lot of overlap too. So psychiatrists are medical doctors who go to medical school. A psychologist is there are different ways to become a psychologist or a therapist or a counselor. Many different tracks, but those are non-medical tracks. Most clinicians who use EMDR, which can be a very useful technique, are not psychiatrists. They are usually psychologists or therapists. And one of the big differences between psychiatrists and these other professions is that we can prescribe medications, as can psychiatric nurse practitioners in many states.
Okay.
So it's a medical versus psychological track. So I use psychotherapy in my work every day. I have very good training in psychotherapy at the residency program that I went to. And I still use medications in my work as well. It's just that it's not the staple of my practice anymore. It's kind of a side dish, if you will, meaning, I always use nutrition interventions first whenever it's clinically feasible to do so.
From your perspective, obviously starting with nutrition being number one, but let's talk about like how medications can be used effectively, for how long, like some parameters for it for someone out there that is apprehensive or that is taking them but has been taking them for years, or like talk about in your experience what those sort of like guidelines should look like when it comes to taking a medication.
So medications definitely have their place, and especially in emergencies situations, because they work much faster than dietary interventions in many cases. And they also are useful in cases where dietary interventions aren't feasible, aren't logistically, for example, if someone is in a residential care facility, somebody with early dementia, and they're not able to, for example, they don't have control over their own food. The food is being made, by the staff at the facility. So, or people who don't want to change their diet, and there are plenty of people who don't want to change their
Plenty
diet.
of people. Well, my dad got that CGM. He was one of them.
Right.
Until he
So
went, oh, I ate that cinnamon roll and it went to 300. I'm like, at least he knows.
I bet it was delicious.
Until about 8 minutes after he ate it and saw his blood sugar was high.
Oh yeah, and so did that change his mind? I'm just curious.
Oh yeah, of course. Oh, as soon as he started seeing stuff, he's like, oh yeah, that smoothie like that. And then, oh, I realized I ate that. And if I just ate some bacon with that, I realized it kept that down. And oh yeah, it was the most effective thing. Some people need to see hard evidence. Dad's one of them.
Most people really do. I mean, for years I practiced without any tests that there was nothing I could show people to say, look, this is why I'm concerned, about your mental health. I had there are no tests for chemical imbalances. There's no good test for brain inflammation. I really was just talking with people and using the powers of persuasion as much as I could to get them to change the way they approach things. And for the first 10 years of my practice, I was really trying to convince people, for the most part, to take medication. And a lot of people don't want to take medication, but I would try to convince them that something was wrong enough that they should take medication. But now with metabolic psychiatry, a CGM and a few simple blood tests that anybody who's listening right now can get for themselves or ask their doctor for, are all you need to show somebody that something is off kilter metabolically.
Yeah.
And so a CGM is wonderful. A ketone meter is wonderful. And then there are a few simple tests. These are not just fasting blood sugar, but your cholesterol panel can be really useful. And if I can show you your cholesterol panel, walk you through it, I can show you whether or not there's too much carbohydrate in your diet just by looking, for example, at your triglyceride level.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, fasting insulin level, waist.
Can you touch on cholesterol for a second though? Because I'm like I have high cholesterol. I have high good cholesterol, high bad cholesterol overall, which accumulates to the number. I'm the idiot here trying to say I know what I'm talking about, but I'm really asking you, how important is that overall cholesterol number? Because kind of some of the things that are the most healthy being like, a steak is good for you. Grass-fed, grass-finished steak. These things have high levels of fat and saturated fat. So is cholesterol kind of an outdated measuring tool for health or is it still helpful?
I do want to push back on you calling yourself an idiot because you're very well informed about these topics, Danica. Much better informed than 95% of the people that I talk to. The way most people think about a cholesterol panel, patients as well as doctors. So there are these four numbers that you see on a cholesterol panel. Four basic numbers are your total cholesterol, your LDL cholesterol, your HDL cholesterol, and your triglycerides. We'll set total cholesterol aside because it just kind of lumps them all together. So the LDL cholesterol is the so-called bad cholesterol, and the HDL cholesterol is the so-called good cholesterol, and the triglycerides are just how much fat is traveling through your bloodstream. So fat in the blood. And most clinicians are trained to zero in on your LDL cholesterol like a laser beam. If it's above a certain number, they are trained to bludgeon it into submission with a medication. Say, that number is too high. LDL cholesterol causes heart disease. It's going to clog up your arteries, cause heart disease. We need to get that number down at all costs. And they will usually recommend a medication like a statin medication, like Lipitor, to lower the cholesterol. And it will lower the LDL cholesterol. That doesn't mean it lowers your risk for heart disease, but it will lower the LDL cholesterol. And that makes doctors feel better because they've done something.
What does it actually do then? If it doesn't actually help that, then this is just, what is it doing?
Well, it makes cholesterol medication producers very wealthy, and it makes doctors feel like they have agency in reducing your risk for cardiovascular disease because that's what they've been taught. So as a doctor, you want to help people, right? So you want to do something that's going to make a difference. And if you've been told, and it's incorrect, but if you've been told that cholesterol is what causes heart disease, then you want to help your patient reduce their risk of heart attack. And so they're just doing what they've been taught. But the problem is cholesterol doesn't cause heart disease. Cholesterol is a vital molecule essential to every cell in the body. And it is so critical to cellular health that the brain is the organ in the body that is richest in cholesterol. And not a single molecule of that cholesterol comes from the food you eat. The brain makes every bit of the cholesterol in your head is made on site from scratch by the brain on purpose. It's that important. Cholesterol is too big and bulky a molecule to cross the blood-brain barrier. So let's say you eat a dozen eggs and you absorb some of that cholesterol and it's floating around in your bloodstream, it can't get into the brain. The cholesterol is too big and bulky to cross the blood-brain barrier. The brain has to make all of its own cholesterol. So the way those medicines work to lower LDL cholesterol is they interfere with the enzyme that builds new cholesterol molecules. And all of those drugs, to a greater or lesser extent, cross the blood-brain barrier and interfere with the brain's ability to manufacture vital cholesterol molecules.
Oh my God. It's just a scam.
It really is. It's a very, very sad state of affairs that we've got ourselves stuck in, villainizing a vital molecule essential to all animal life.
That's blowing my mind. Wow. Okay. All right. Great. So
for anybody out there who's taking a statin medication, and there are many, many, many people who do.
Yeah.
Yes, it may be lowering your LDL cholesterol, but it's not reducing your risk for a cardiac event. In fact, it's likely raising your risk because one of the things that statin medications do, one of the many negative, one of the many side effects of a statin medication is that it increases your risk for type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes is one of the biggest risk factors for cardiovascular disease that one can imagine. It also interferes with the production of many vital molecules in the body, including the production of coenzyme Q, which is a mitochondrial molecule. Your mitochondria cannot function properly without coenzyme Q, and you can't build coenzyme Q. That's why people take CoQ10 with their statin. Your mitochondria need to be really robustly healthy for you to be healthy. You do not want to be interfering with mitochondrial function with a drug. And many, many people who take statin medications have brain fog or difficulty with word finding, cognitive clouding, because again, they do cross the blood-brain barrier. And many, many people who take a statin medication experience muscle pain, sometimes and stiffness, sometimes to the point of being significantly disabling. And stopping those statin medications, have to, talk it over with your doctor and so forth.
Yeah.
But I'm not here to tell people, I'm not giving medical
Sure.
advice. I'm giving information,
Right.
which is that I cannot tell you how many patients I've seen who have decided with counseling and talking to various people on their team, including me, to stop their statin medication just to see for a little while to see if they noticed any benefits to stopping the statin. Brain clears up, muscle pain goes away, they feel 10 years younger. And so there are many more risks than benefits to statin medications. Let me just pause there because I knew you had other questions about the cholesterol pain, but let me just stop there for a minute and see if you want to.
Yeah, no, I'm curious about the interaction between your statin medicine and type 2 diabetes. Is this because cholesterol somehow helps the body's insulin response or blood sugar levels? Because why does type 2 diabetes rise with statins?
It's an excellent question, and the simple answer is that that statin medications interfere with normal cellular function, including the function of the cells in the pancreas that make insulin. All cells in the body require cholesterol and all of the other molecules that come out of that cholesterol pathway. And so, for example, reproductive hormones are made from cholesterol. Vitamin D is made from cholesterol. There are many important, testosterone, estrogen. There are many molecules that are made from cholesterol. And if you interfere with that pathway, you will have some downstream effects that were unintended.
Well, I mean, while I'm thinking about it right now, because it's popped into my head a couple of times, and you mentioned mitochondrial function, we've been talking about insulin, we're talking about blood sugar level, is the insane rise of GLP-1s and how those are generally things that it goes to help to lower blood sugar, to help mitochondrial function to some degree, generally reduce inflammation. Then there's been a lot of doctors that have also talked about the microdosing aspect of it and not necessarily the titrating up that the drug companies would want you to do so that you use a lot of their product, but essentially using small doses. So have you, is that part of your practice? Do you prescribe that to any patients? What have you seen and what are your thoughts on it?
So GLP-1s are fascinating, and the reason why they're so popular, as you alluded to, is that they actually work. So assuming people can tolerate them, which not everybody can, and assuming people can afford them, which not everybody can, and assuming which people can access them, which not everybody can, they can be very helpful because they improve metabolic health. They reduce appetite. They lower insulin levels. They lower glucose levels. They help you feel full, so you eat less. And most people are eating too much. And so the GLP-1s are they're actually going right to the root of the problem, and they're helping people eat less, which lowers their insulin and their glucose levels and improves their metabolic health. And when you lower your insulin levels, fat burning switches on. And so, of course, you're going to lose weight. So GLP-1s are almost, this may be overstating it just a little bit, but not too much. They're really like a ketogenic diet in a shot. You can accomplish all of these things, feeling full after meals, getting your appetite under good control, getting your insulin levels down, getting your glucose levels down, and losing weight with the right dietary changes. The problem is that it's harder, of course, to change your diet than to take the medicine. And so, but there have been some beautiful studies. There's just a new one that just came out last week, actually, by Dr. Trokalajian, showing that that with a ketogenic diet, you could achieve the very same benefits at a lot much lower cost.
Yeah.
And there's another study by Verta Health showing that if you people who had benefited from GLP-1s, Verta Health is a virtual clinic that treats people with type 2 diabetes using low carbohydrate diets and helps people get off their diabetes medications and lose weight. People who are on GLP-1s, if they were benefiting from them, they were, losing weight and their glucose levels were coming into a healthy range. They switched them from a GLP-1 to a low carbohydrate diet, and they were able to maintain those same benefits long term without the medication.
That's great research.
It's great research. And so I think it's great that people have choices. And there are some people who, especially in the beginning, especially if they've really dealt with a really serious history of food addiction or obesity, or, they're really depressed and they have a difficult time even imagining being able to change their lifestyle, to use a GLP-1 as a bridge to a healthier lifestyle, to build some confidence, get some results, get things going, shift into that ketogenic state, which can take a few weeks, and then use that as a bridge to a healthier lifestyle. I'm all for it. And I've had some patients use GLP-1s in that way. I've had some patients use GLP-1s in addition to a ketogenic diet when they're in really kind of more tougher situations with food addiction and obesity. I have had some patients use GLP-1s, but they're definitely not my they're not my go-to, but I've seen them work in conjunction with lifestyle counseling.
Because I've also heard it has a positive psychological benefit of essentially less food noise, even less alcohol. Like there's just like less negativity in the mind. Like there's a psychological aspect to it too.
Again, you're exactly right, Danica, and that the mental health benefits of GLP-1s mirror the mental health benefits of the ketogenic diet. And the ketogenic diet is a very powerful mental health intervention. And so it's no surprise at all that GLP-1s would have those mental health benefits, because when you lower insulin levels, lower glucose levels, eat less, and you take a lot of that pressure off of your delicate insulin signaling system, and you allow some ketones to be produced, which cross into the brain and can bridge energy gaps, which many of us now have because of insulin resistance. It's not just that you're at risk for type 2 diabetes with insulin resistance or obesity or other kinds of diseases like cancer and cardiovascular disease. You're at a much higher risk for dementia, depression, bipolar disorder, anxiety disorders, because the brain becomes insulin resistant. And if the brain is insulin resistant, glucose, blood sugar, can still waltz in, no questions asked, but insulin is going to have a harder and harder time crossing in, and the brain can't use glucose to full capacity efficiently to turn it into energy or anything else without adequate insulin. So you can have a brain swimming in a sea of glucose, but still slowly be starving to death because of lack of adequate insulin. And that's where a ketogenic diet or GLP-1, which I believe puts people into ketosis. We're going to need to see more data on that, but I believe that's what's happening, is that when you're in ketosis, you're burning fat and you're chopping that fat up into little fragments little ready to burn fragments that travel through the bloodstream, dissolve in the bloodstream, and cross easily into the brain, and they can bridge that energy gap. The brain can use those ketones to supplement its energy supply. So now your brain's working like a hybrid engine with a mixture of glucose and ketones, and any cells that were sputtering along, trying to do their best with not quite enough glucose energy, can come back online.
Is there a difference between insulin in the brain and insulin in the body?
Oh, wow. Yes. Actually, yes.
When you said that, I was like, wait a second. If there's a separation between the brain and the body with cholesterol based on the blood-brain barrier, then, and you mentioned the brain and insulin, is there a difference between the brain and the body?
Yes and no. So the brain uses insulin and glucose a little differently than the rest of the body. Okay. And so, for example, muscle cells, and fat cells, people often think of insulin as a key and a lock that kind of lets glucose into those cells. The brain doesn't put any barriers to letting glucose in. The brain is so dependent on constant supply of high quality energy. It allows glucose to waltz in, no questions asked. You don't need insulin to get glucose into the brain. And that's a big difference, which many people aren't aware of, a big difference between the brain and some of the other organs in the body. But once insulin gets into the brain, all of the cells inside the brain have insulin receptors on their surfaces to listen to insulin's messages. And what insulin is doing is it is telling those cells how to use glucose, what to do with the glucose that's coming in, and giving those cells instructions. So if there isn't enough insulin coming into the brain, cells can't use glucose properly because they don't have that kind of foreman standing there saying, we want this glucose molecule to be burned for energy. We want this glucose molecule to go build a DNA molecule. We want this glucose molecule to build, you know what I mean? It's basically the instructions for how the cells will use that glucose.
Okay. But the brain will make glucose out of anything, right? Didn't you say?
Well, the brain absorbs glucose from the bloodstream.
Okay.
And so that's blood glucose. Yeah. So it crosses into the brain very easily. It's the insulin that has a harder and harder time getting in.
Such a matrix. The body's such a matrix. If you were to be able to design the food pyramid instead of the sad pyramid that we have, what would that look like?
Well, if it were a pyramid, I would turn it essentially upside down. And
you did say that at the very beginning.
There's a wonderful South Park episode about that. But in the book, I have a diagram which is circular, and it's sort of like a planet with the core and then the outer layers, right? So it's got these shells and layers. The core of the diet. Thank you. The core of the diet is non-dairy animal foods. That's how I would do it. Non-dairy foods, meat, seafood, poultry, and eggs would be at the core of the diet. And just in the next layer out, assuming you tolerate them, are fruits and vegetables to your personal carbohydrate tolerance. For some people, that's going to be quite a small amount. For others who are more metabolically healthy, especially people who are athletic or younger, just metabolically luckier, they may be able to tolerate a very wide variety and quite a large amount of fruits and vegetables, kind of like a paleo style diet, which is one of the diets in the book. Non-dairy animal foods at the core, fruits and vegetables to tolerance, not just carbohydrate tolerance, but also what you tolerate, what bothers you and doesn't. And there's information about that in the book as well to personalize it. So fruits and vegetables. And then as you move outward from there, you get to the nuts and seeds, for example, and the dairy foods. Nuts and seeds and dairy are nutritious, but they do come with some risks to be aware of. So now you're getting into a slightly riskier area. And then everything outside of those three food groups are more risk than benefit. These are the grains and the legumes and all the processed foods and alcohol, sugar, cereals, etc. Everything else, vegetable oils, everything else is outside of that safe core.
Well, I think Robert F. Kennedy, HHS director, needs to give you a call and consult with you on some of these things.
We do need major changes. We need major changes to our dietary recommendations. The dietary guidelines are really very dangerous, actually.
Yeah. Well, as soon as we get, big food, big pharma, big corp out of the pockets of the people that make decisions, then we might be able to get to the place where we should be. As rich as this country is, it is the most unhealthy, and that's a crime.
It really is. And I don't know how fast it may change, but one of the things I love about you inviting me on to talk about this to people is that people can make their own changes. Most people are in a situation where if they have the right information, they don't need to wait for those big political changes or to get the money out of food. Amen. or for laws to change. But I just am really a big believer in, I don't know if we can really just keep trying to medicate and legislate our way out of this. I think we have to take personal responsibility for our food choices, get the right information and take action. And it's amazing how fast you can see results if you have the right information.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like sometimes just weeks. So thank you for diving into yourself, diving into all your patients, and to write this book that gives people hope and results at the end of the day. That's what everybody wants, is to just feel better. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Danica.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Pretty Intense podcast today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you like what you heard today and you want to hear more, please click on the subscribe button.